From the halls of Austin to the fights in D.C. that hit us at home, this is Politics with the Big Dogs.
Hello, hello, hello. This is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. Folks, we have such a great show for you today. There's so much going on in policy and politics. And, of course, the State of the Union just a few days ago. There's almost too much for us to get done in an hour. We have a guest coming on in a little bit named James Wesolek, whose background is in policy and advocacy and conservative, very strong conservative, Heritage Foundation, Heritage Action, which implements a lot of their good policies, state party, communications director. That's where I stumbled upon him. Actually, it was at Heritage as I think about it. And then in and out of the Texas Capitol, but a constitutional conservative, a real strong policy advocate and right-minded individual who just launched an organization called RATLR, RATLR.org. It's a nonprofit educational and advocacy group standing for Republicans Against TLR. So he's going to be on our show and explain what he's doing, why it's important, and then I'm going to answer as much as I can before the show ends your many questions. So many of them are about what is happening in politics, in these primaries and runoffs, and what is Governor I've been repeatedly asked by media and many of you listeners, what is on the hook for Governor Abbott? How big is this primary outcome? I suggest it's very big. Three major events that we have to be watching for. He's done a lot of endorsements, but three far and away are on a different level of all others. And then we're going to do an assessment of where some of these campaigns are. And, of course, we'll know in 3 days what's going to happen and why. But you have been asking, so I'm going to address as many of these as I possibly can. But in just a moment, we're going to bring on James Wesolek of RATLR.org, which is just this fascinating organization that has launched recently. I've only recently become familiar with, but he's got a lot to say, and it wasn't lost on me that this is probably 5 years in the making by conservatives who are unhappy with the policy and the liberal policy many of the times that TLR has been advancing in the Texas Legislature, number one, and number two, their outside influence. So we have talked about hubris. We had Michael Quinn Sullivan on in the past, this documentary about TLR's efforts and the House efforts, but often considered to be led by TLR to impeach Ken Paxton and how they were exposed through the trial, that they were deeply enmeshed and involved. And now there's a nonprofit that sprung up to combat them at the policy level and just call them out for moving rhinos and bad policy. So here we go. Without further ado, let's bring in James Wesolek. We'll get him in the studio here. We'll go to a short break and get him situated, and then we'll go live with James. Thank you so much. This is Anthony Holm, Politics with the Big Dogs. Make sure you sign up for our newsletter. Follow us on social media. Let's engage. Let's do great things for Texas.
Thanks, Anthony. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at politicswiththebigdogs.com. We'll keep you informed on new episodes, new guests, and new opportunities for your voice to be heard across Texas. Learn more and sign up today at politicswiththebigdogs.com. Trying to make sense of the March primaries? We've built a playlist to walk you through how these offices actually work. On YouTube, search Politics with the Big Dogs and listen to our latest playlist.
We have James Wesolek on with us today. Am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
You are. Wesolek, yep.
Wesolek. I don't have quite the same flow as you. James has been a chief of staff and a conservative activist, chief of staff in the legislature, communications director at the state party. That's where he and I overlap. So I've only known him a little bit for a few years, and most recently launched a nonprofit. No, you were at Heritage Action, as I recall. I think actually that's where your name came. Am I remembering that correctly? Okay, so
yeah. I've experienced in D.C. and here in Austin, so I've been playing in both capitals.
You know, that was one of the very few organizations for whom I lobbied. I actually would register as a lobbyist because the Heritage Action folks, they're so aligned with my personal values and conservative values. So that's where we first overlapped. But then you were at the party as well as comms director. And most recently, launched a nonprofit advocating for sound policy, conservative policy, and educating people, right? Am I doing that service?
That's correct. We launched Republicans Against TLR to talk about what conservative legal policy looks like.
And I love the acronym RATLR, right?
That's right.
And I swear I saw a logo of yours. It was like a rattlesnake with a Texas flag and all. Is that correct?
That's correct. We got the coiled rattlesnake there, kind of playing off some of those "Don't Tread on Me" vibes. And Republicans Against TLR, the acronym RATLR, just makes it a little easier to say. It sounds cool, and it gets people's attention.
Yeah, it does. And look, folks, you guys have heard us talking about TLR. I'll bet is a reasonably obscure lobby and PAC organization in Austin, but they came to be about 30 years ago or so, and I was very involved with them. Full disclosure, listeners, very involved with them. I think they did great things for Texas for the first many, many years. The last 6-8 years, their policies have deviated what I believe are conservative values, and clearly a whole bunch of other conservatives. And then I suspect James will speak to this, but my observation is about a third or a half of the hardline conservatives have really had a burr in the saddle over TLR, both because they spent millions of dollars funding Democrats, but also many of the rhinos who are in Austin. So I've had a rub with them that, all right, we did tort reform 20 years ago, right? Like, shut it down. Let's go fix the schools. Let's go fix the tax system. Let's go fix these other things. But they seem to continue to want to exist like many organizations and have now moved into unsound policy. So I'll turn it over. Like, that's my observation. You tell me what's going on and tell our listeners.
Yeah, thank you. And it's important to know, let's start out by giving credit where credit is due here, right? As you said, TLR was founded in 1994 to fix some of Texas's civil court problems, right? And they did a great job, and they deserve to be praised for the work that they did. But as tends to happen, they did a great job. They got into power. Power corrupts, and they've stuck around and started to do things that violate conservative and Republican principles. And they're getting away with it because they're funding not only Democrats. They've given $6 million to Democrats over the years, but then they're also funding these rhinos who are willing to toe the line and take their votes. And they're doing that at the expense of solid Republican conservatives that the grassroots have worked hard for to get elected, and they're pushing back against them and trying and spending millions of dollars against Republicans to get them out of office. And folks are starting to wake up and pay attention, and they've had enough.
I saw some of those. I'm sure you can educate us on what else they're doing. But in Bexar County in San Antonio, like Marc Dorazio, this is a guy who couldn't be any more constitutional conservative, sound, religious, faith-based conservative. I've known him forever and a day. And I'll give an example. He was the chair of the Bexar County Party back when Strauss, all of us remember fighting Joe Strauss as we're trying to advance policy. The guy stopped education reform, and I think he was opposed to voter ID and everything else. But so Marc is the chair. He was the first, or certainly one of the first, who censured Strauss and said, hey, you got to go and move a conservative agenda. You got elected with all the Democrats and a handful of moderate R's when you did this big coup, but you got to go move Republican policy. And now, I don't know how many years later, Marc's in the Texas House. He is definitely on the far edge of the bell curve on conservative, and TLR's funding against him. They went and pulled out a challenger and funding against him, as I understand. Is that right?
That's right. And look, I got to know Marc when he was on the state Republican executive committee, and I was working for the party as the communications director, as you talked about. The man is dyed-in-the-wool conservative. And a lot of folks a lot of grassroots activists worked really hard in that district to get Marc elected. And Marc took 1 or 2 votes that TLR disagreed with, and now they're coming after him in the primary, spending a lot of money to get him defeated and to get him unelected. And it's unacceptable.
And they're doing the same thing to the neighbor in Bexar County, Marc LaHood.
That's right. They spent millions against Marc LaHood.
I mean, that's just insane. So
in a state house race, millions of dollars in a primary. It is designed to flood the zone and make it impossible for good conservatives to stand up. And they want to turn these guys into an example so that they can defeat 1 or 2 of them and pull everybody else in line. And that Texas politicians should not be bullied in this way.
Yeah, I agreed. Look, though I helped them, and frankly, I still help. I got to admit, last session, there were 3 bills of theirs I really paid attention to. One, I was supportive, and I offered to help them if they didn't want my help. And 2 others I was opposed to. They were just bad policy, but the other one was good policy. So I'm gonna keep calling balls and strikes on policy and aiding them where I can, and where it makes sense and we're in alignment. But I am struck. 2 years ago, conservative donors and the conservative base took out one of the most moderate Republicans in the Texas House in Bill Allison and replaced Bill with Marc LaHood, a strong
Steve
conservative.
Allison.
Or I said Mark. Yeah, thank you for the correction. Steve Allison. Steve Allison is the guy who took Strauss's spot, right? Like they're perennially holding this one House seat hostage until 2 years ago. And Governor Abbott and everybody else weighed in and tremendous amounts of money, and they passed conservative bills. One being the school choice and school reform. Well, TLR is now spending upwards of $2 million. My understanding is went and recruited somebody against him and put $2 million against LaHood. I bet he wins and wins big by like 10 or so. So I suspect the years of the speaker in the Texas House having to bend the knee to the will of TLR is over. But we'll see. And what they have a huge PAC. I don't remember how much but it was tens of millions. Do you know? I mean, they're the biggest donor by far.
It's north of 30 million. I've heard up to 50. Yeah.
Wow. And of course they give to D's and R's, but my rub has been, and tell me if you agree or grade my paper on this, like we haven't been able to get meaningful tax reform because if you were a rhino and you voted with TLR, then you got to do anything you wanted. We couldn't get meaningful school reform because if you were a rhino and you voted with TLR, then you could oppose all these other things. We couldn't, there's so many, we can't pass taxpayer-funded lobbying. One of my big rubs. Well, if you're a rhino and you're opposed to it, then and you vote for with TLR, then they're going to fund you no matter what, and millions of dollars if you need. That's my assessment of it. Do you have something different?
No, I think you're right, and I think it's an important point to make here. With a name like Republicans Against TLR, folks are going to think we're blanket opposed to everything. And as you said, there's some good things that they do, and when they do a good thing, we'll work with them. But more importantly, RATLR's focused on conservative policy. Right. And so we're looking at the outcomes here. And when we see bad outcomes, we're going to call it out and we're going to do something about it. And one of the ways that we see that is, as you said, when Marc LaHood, as an example, we talked about Marc Dorazio as well. Both of these guys took 1 or 2 votes with which TLR disagreed. And now they're spending millions of dollars against them. The same thing is true on the flip side. If you take 1 or 2 good votes that TLR agrees with, they will spend millions of dollars to support you. And it doesn't matter what else you do or how many other bad votes you take on good conservative principles. Tax reform, school choice, taxpayer-funded lobbying, name the issue. If you're in agreement on the 1 or 2 votes with TLR, you're going to get millions of dollars into your campaign. These are state house races. These guys don't have millions of dollars. Primary challengers in a Republican primary especially don't have millions of dollars. And so it is literally a Kingmaker system where TLR is able to come in and donate $500,000, $1 million, upwards of that to a state house candidate or a state senator, and it clears the field and it prevents good Republican grassroots challengers from even getting a foothold and making a difference in the legislature.
That's such a good point. The people who work day in and day out can't get a foothold because this tidal weight of money. It's a real anomaly. So if you're just joining us, this is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. We have James Wesolek, the executive director of RATLR, Republicans Against TLR, and a new nonprofit doing policy advocacy and education among the people of Texas. So, it's so interesting, right? And then our regular listeners will remember Ken Paxton was on, I don't know, some weeks ago or maybe a couple months ago, and he brought up TLR, but he did it in a different context. He brought it up in relation to the impeachment. He said, it was a made-up deal. I was sabotaged, and it was run by TLR. And here's how I know that. And he laid out a very persuasive argument to that end. So I think conservatives have really gotten up in arms and realized that there's this, reasonably obscure little group out there that has so much power. I mean, they aren't the realtors, they aren't the builders, they're kind of a trade association, but they have just traditionally had so much power that a group of conservatives came together to oppose them. I mean,
that's right. And look,
I'm astounded.
Your average grassroots activist probably has no reason before the impeachment and some other things to know who TLR was, right? They're focused on a very narrow thing. They call it tort reform. It's civil court reform. Most Texans never come in contact with that in their day-to-day life, right? It takes a lot of time and effort to understand policy. It takes even more time and effort to understand legal policy. And this is what TLR specializes in. So most folks don't pay attention because it's not something that involves them. As this started to come to the forefront, right, we saw Ken Paxton begin to talk about how they were one of the driving forces behind the impeachment. People started to pay attention. Then we started to see some bad policy come out in the last legislative session. And folks are paying more and more attention and starting to realize TLR is not so great anymore. And that's part of what we're doing at RATLR as a nonprofit, is to educate folks on these issues and get them up to speed on what's really going on and what's happening behind the scenes so that they can be better informed and know what to do.
And where can folks learn more about RATLR? What's the web address?
Yeah, our website is ratlr.org, rattlr.org. We've got lots of information there about TLR's history of donating to Democrats, breaking down some of their policy from the last legislative session so folks can get a better understanding of what that is. Like I said before, we're about policy here. We're not into personality games. We're going to look at the outcomes. And that information is on our website, ratlr.org, rattlr.org. Folks can go check it out and read it for themselves and make up their own mind.
Of course. But yeah, it was not lost on me a few days ago when Donald Trump's State of the Union, he said, he called out foreign truck drivers for having foreign CDLs and not speaking English and can't have it. It's dangerous. And they're killing people all over the country. So that was one of the two bills that I really fervently opposed. So TLR drafted a bill. Current law, folks, you guys have heard me talk about this, but I'm going to remind us all. And if you're just joining, this is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs, and we have James Wesolek, ED of RATLR. RATLR.org, a nonprofit advocacy group and educational effort. So Trump comes out and says, we can't do this. We got to enforce the federal regulations that say you got to be able to read English, got to be able to speak English, you got to drive on a U.S. CDL, not some Cuban or Iraqi or something else, and it's just a safety function. Well, in Texas, if you can't speak English, you can't read English, or you're driving on a foreign CDL and you cause a crash, the jury automatically learns that. Mm-hmm. Period. That's a standard law. The legislature in its wisdom said, hey, we think this is important enough that if you cause a crash, the jury, it's automatic admission of the jury. Well, TLR, who I think were just standing up for the insurance companies in this instance, the insurers of the trucking said, well, we want to change the law. We want to make it so that doesn't automatically come in. It's got to be causative and, really narrow it. And they got poor Jeff Leach in Plano, who they've given over $2 million to carry the bill. And, Trump came out and tweeted against that concept and really collapsed the bill and killed it. But it set up bad policy, and it made it bad politics as poor Jeff Leach having to deal with it. Am I interpreting that correctly?
No, you're 100% right. And look, what's interesting about this is, as you said, this bill would have kept certain information, among which was, does the truck driver speak and read English, from automatically going to the jury, which I view it as government coming in and putting their thumb on the scale against everyday Texans, right? If a truck driver is involved in a crash, there's information that the jury needs to know in order to make an informed decision. Does your truck driver speak English? Could he pass a road safety test? Did he pass a field sobriety test? These are things that a jury needs to know to make an informed decision. And when you pass legislation that says you can't tell the jury that stuff, you're using the weight and the thumb of government to tilt the scales of justice. And that's not right. And that's what TLR brought in. And they were very sneaky about it because they brought it in and said, this is a bill that's going to lower insurance costs, right? Insurance costs are out of control. And we can have a conservative Republican conversation about lowering insurance costs, which is something that probably does need to happen. If you talk to any small business owner,
I agree.
I know a plumber who can't afford to have insurance on his fleet of plumbing vans anymore because it's just going through the roof.
Yep.
So let's have that conversation. But let's do that in a way that benefits Texans, not that uses the force of government to fight against Texans and keep the jury from knowing vital information when someone screws up, very clearly screws up.
No question. Let's do it with integrity. And all these House members that I was talking to, and even some senators, oh, that's not in the bill. TLR would never do that. I signed on as a co-author. They didn't believe it for weeks, and then it got outed more and more as it drug on. They're like, what? I think a lot of them had buyer's remorse, and what did you do to me? And clearly that's certain. But this other one was a similar cap. It was, hey, $250,000 for emotional harm. That's our lid. If you live through a trauma, it's $250,000. I opposed that one as well. And, I'm sitting there going, well, what about the little girl who got molested? Like, why do we say that the rest of her life, that should be $250,000 is all she can recover? And I actually showed up and testified against it, and I brought a picture of a bad burn victim. Somebody who's been burned on 80% of their body, that's you're going to deal with that forever. And these guys are like, yeah, but we're going to put $250,000, $250,000 cap on that for his emotional trauma and pain and suffering. Like, that's just fundamentally wrong, and that's pro-insurance.
It is.
I mean, will it lower insurance? Yes, of course, right? But come on. At what
If you're
cost?
going to use the government to limit an insurance payout, then, it'll lower insurance. I'm going to do air quotes here because we're on the radio. Folks can't see it. It will lower insurance costs, right? But it's not.
You're the cost of the trauma of a little girl. Like, come on.
And look, here's the example that I used for this, right? This has been kind of the news in a lot of Republican circles recently. A detransitioner. So someone who was born biologically female, transitioned as much as that can happen to a male, regretted that decision and came back to female, sued in New York, right? So this is the state that elected Hillary Rodham Clinton senator twice. They just elected a socialist as their mayor in New York City. She sued, went to a jury of her peers. That jury awarded her $2 million in pain and suffering because she's going to have a lifetime of medical complications from this transition, which all of her doctors told her was completely reversible, and Republican activists know that that's bogus. A New York jury gave her $2 million.
In pain
TLR
and
had a bill here in Texas that said you couldn't give her that much money. It would have been capped at $250,000, and that's wrong.
Yeah. You're right. That is fundamentally wrong, and also just putting lids on juries violates the notion of liberty, in my opinion.
Right.
A while back, TLR went in and quietly passed a bill that actually stripped many of us, all of us, of our right to elect some of our judges and turn them into appointed positions. And fine, Abbott's out there appointing them, and generally he probably makes good appointments. But come on, like I think. I want the right to elect my judges and not defer to somebody else. And what happens if a Democrat ever gets in there or somebody I don't agree with? There has been this through line the last few years of kind of maybe looking for something to do instead of just wrapping it up and celebrating. But they are just the not 800-pound gorilla, the 8,000-pound gorilla. I mean, am I mischaracterizing?
No,
that?
That's right. And look, you mentioned earlier that a lot of these senators and representatives didn't believe you when you told them what was in the bill, and they just signed on because it was a TLR bill. And we started this conversation talking about the influence that TLR has because of the amount of money that they have. And this is the problem, right? TLR walks into an elected official's office and said, here's a bill to lower insurance costs. The elected officials trust TLR, for better and worse. File that bill, sign on to it because they know they're going to get millions of dollars into their campaign account. That's not how politics should work. It's not how business should work, right?
How policy should be made, right?
That's right. We should be reading this policy and trust but verify, right? That's the way Republicans have been since Reagan. But that doesn't happen. And they get a pass. TLR gets a pass because they did good things 20 years ago. And again, I give them full kudos for doing good things 20 years ago. 20 years ago is not now. And we need to be reading this policy and making sure it aligns with our values and that we know what's in it. And that's what RATLR is about, Republicans Against TLR. We're about policy, and we're going to be looking at that policy and holding elected officials accountable if they're supporting bad policy.
Good. And look, I'm going to walk you to the edge here. If TLR had a good bill, would you support it?
If they had a good bill, I would. I haven't seen them have a good bill in a while.
Okay.
But if they had one.
Understood. Well, fair. But look, that's important because nobody just wants to oppose a group. We want to advance policy, sound policy. But unfortunately, it sounds like this organization needed to exist to help do that. Also going to put you on the spot a little bit because Ken Paxton was on the show, and I think he said this on the air, but I was shocked to learn, whether we did it live or not, that during the impeachment trial, so the House votes to impeach, Paxton said, these guys were largely behind it. And they went out publicly, TLR publicly, no, we're not. This is just an organic event. I heard from a number of members that they were trading bills for it, 100% driven by TLR. But then it goes over to the Senate for a trial. We all watched that, and the Senate said, no, this is nothing, no here, and unwound everything. But through the course of that trial, Paxton's team got to do discovery. They got to go and look at documents, and Paxton's team produced a document from Karl Rove and the head of TLR that was, hey, here's a draft opinion editorial for the Wall Street Journal calling on the guy to resign, and we got to go and impeach him. So it became obvious that they were deeply enmeshed, and they weren't forthright about, TLR wasn't forthright about its involvement in the Paxton impeachment effort, and if not driving it. But what struck me was Paxton said, and I didn't get that evidence from TLR. They ignored Dan Patrick's subpoena. So how it was is the Texas Senate ran the trial, and Dan Patrick was the judge. And the Senate and the judge issue subpoenas. Well, TLR is so powerful, they just ignored, per Ken Paxton, all of Dan Patrick's subpoenas. Karl Rove complied, others complied, so they got the communications between them. But there was a whole trove of evidence that didn't even get presented. The accused was unable to capture it. That's how powerful TLR is. They can just thumb their nose at Dan Patrick, and nothing happened. I mean, that was my read from Paxton on it. Does that surprise you at all?
Unfortunately not. And look, Attorney General Paxton is going to be the expert on this. As you said, we saw the email between Karl Rove and TLR where they were kind of shopping around this letter to try and find somebody to sign it and get it submitted. But it's very unfortunate they have this much power that they can just ignore a subpoena that, again, everyday Texans like you and me, if we did that, we'd be in a heck of a lot of trouble.
We would. And also, look, it's just so unjust to accuse somebody and try to impeach them and kick them out of office, and then make it an environment where they are unable to collect evidence from who might be the largest advocate of the impeachment, right? The real power behind the scenes. So anyway, a sidebar there. That's for Attorney General Paxton. We'll have him on again, and we'll probe that. Okay, well, how's it going? You guys launched when? I became aware of you recently. Tell me what's going on.
Yeah, we launched right here around the beginning of February, so we've had a great response from folks. People are flocking to us and saying, man, I mean, we're in the middle of primary season, right? So everybody's acutely aware of the money that TLR is spending either against or for their favorite candidate. And so folks are flocking to us and saying, look, TLR's playing in this race. Can you help me? Can you do this? What information do you have? How can we talk about this? The response has just been overwhelming. It's been fantastic. I'm packing my bags right now. I'm going to be traveling the state here after the primaries, having conversations like this with grassroots groups, educating folks on what the policy the TLR has been pushing is. If you want to have me come speak to your group, go to our website, ratlr.org, rattler.org. There's a button there at the top to request a speaker. Fill out that form. I'll get in touch with you. I'd love to come out and speak to your group about it, let them know what's going on. But it's just less than a month old, already been an overwhelming response, and we're growing by the day.
Well, congratulations. I've had so many people say, have you heard of this group? Are you seen this? Have you boom, boom, boom? And a lot of them are material activists, like party infrastructure style activists, leaders of big organizations, well known. I'm like, holy smokes, so you're getting juice, that's for sure. All right, and I assume I'm an old guy who's not very cool, but I assume you're on all social media. What are those?
That's right. We're also on social media. You can find us there at RATLR Inc. INC RATLR Inc. On all social media, Facebook, X, YouTube, Instagram, all that stuff. We're all there. So folks can look us up and follow us that way to stay in touch.
What have I failed to ask you about?
Oh, goodness. I guess let me just encapsulate some things here and wrap this up a little bit. We recognize that TLR did good things, right? When they first started in the 90s, they did some great stuff. They deserve those kudos. Power corrupts. TLR has become the drain plug of the Austin swamp at this point, right? They're millions of dollars in campaign donations, produce an inordinate amount of loyalty that blocks other conservative wins. And so we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about the policy. We're not into the personalities of things. RATLR is about policy. We're going to be getting grassroots activists educated on this issue like we talked about. It's a niche, right? You have to understand policy. You have to understand legal policy. Most folks haven't done that in a while, but as more and more events have started to come out, they've gotten more and more involved. And we're going to help get them up to speed on some of that. Had a great response.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. It feels to me like this is maybe year 5 of this type of effort. Like, as we're talking, I'm reminded of Hubris, that documentary. I think that's what it was called, which was an expose about TLR's manipulation of the impeachment effort. It's an incredible documentary by Michael Quinn Sullivan's group. Do you know where that
That's
is?
right.
I assume you've seen it.
I have seen it. Yeah, we actually link it on our website. So if you want to go to RATLR.org, it's there in our blog post about TLR's deceit. You can learn a little bit more about some of the shady things that they've done, and we link directly to that documentary. It's a great documentary. It says the same things that we're saying, which is part of the reason why I think, like you said, this feels like year 5, because we're dovetailing perfectly with kind of where the grassroots are. They've had a feeling that TLR isn't the good guy for a while, but they don't really know why. And we're coming out and articulating that in a clear and understandable way. And folks are flocking to us because they've been wanting this information. And it's really just been a rocket ship of growth.
The more I hear this and think about it, it just makes so much sense to me that it would happen that way. For example, those bills last session were opposed by like the vaccine choice folks. Why? Because it put a $250,000 cap on any litigation if a vaccine hurts your kid. Open borders guys, because it was trying to create an environment where we had more foreign truck drivers who couldn't read or speak English because it was easier to insure and less liability, right? And they had a $250,000 injury if you lived through it, and $1 million if it killed you, right? Holy smokes. So there was a lot of material conservative activists who came out and said, no. But like me and like you, I think focus on policy. And this has been happening more and more where we've had to fight bad policy out of this organization in the last few, if not several years. But now
that's right. And look, let's give a concrete example here so folks understand, right? We talked about the detransition case out of New York where that would have been capped. The vaccine choice people got involved. Why? Because if you got the COVID jab and you picked up myocarditis and you've got to deal with that for the rest of your life, or heaven forbid, you just fell over dead one day from it, it limits the amount of money that you can receive. It puts and
your kids.
That's
from the loss of their parent.
That's right.
I have two.
An incredibly low value at that, with the trucking bills. These are SB 30 and SB 39, by the way, if folks want to look them up. The trucking bill, we're taking jobs away from Americans again to give them to cheaper foreign labor that doesn't read and speak English. And then you wonder why all these folks are getting in a crash. I mean, this came to a head during the session because just a mile from my house on Highway 35 here in Austin, there was a 5-car pileup where a semi-truck driver smashed 5 cars to pieces, killed 2 people. The guy didn't speak English. He didn't know anything, couldn't pass a field sobriety test. And
none of that would have come in. None of that would not know that. Maybe the field sobriety test would, but they wouldn't know the guy can't read or speak English if he just sits there quietly, or that he's driving on a foreign CDL.
That's right. And so these are things that hurt Texans, everyday Texans, and that TLR is supporting. And at RATLR, we just think that's wrong.
Well, it is wrong. Do you think they're funded by the insurance lobby? Is that what this is about? Big insurance trying to put lids?
I think partially, yeah. I mean, look, we all know big business, big pharma, big insurance, those guys all tend to run together. And when they see an opportunity like this to team up with somebody to accomplish their goal, but that makes it even worse, right? Because now not only does TLR have millions of dollars, but big insurance and big pharma and big whoever has even more millions of dollars. And they're just trying to ram it down the throat of everyday Texans who don't have millions of dollars. And that's not the way our system is supposed to work. It's not supposed to be a pay-to-play kind of thing.
No, agreed. And it's not in the interest of 31 million Texans who live here. So if you're just joining us, Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. We have James Wesolek, executive director of a nonprofit called RATLR, RATLR.org, Republicans Against TLR, which is focused on bad policy, not the organization itself. And, you know, as you were given concrete examples, it occurred to me, last session, Uber got really involved and started spending money trying to help pass TLR's bill. Well, why? Mm-hmm. Because we now have seen across the nation like many thousands of Uber drivers who had sexually assaulted passengers, and Uber's being sued for that. So they wanted to cap those damages of, you know, if one of our Uber drivers raped somebody, then her mental harm can't be over $250,000 if she lived through it. Like, wow. And they spent, I think, $5 or $6 million trying to pass this bill. This is all about insurance rates and profit.
It's a protection for big business and big insurance that limits their risk, right? They don't want to go into a trial with an unknown number. They want to say, we can go in and it's a max of this much money, because then they'll just write the check and save the court costs and everything else. And that's wrong.
Sorry, go on. Yes, sir.
It doesn't make Texans whole, right? If you're a victim, the goal of the justice system is to restore you to the way you were before the incident, right? Whatever it is. And when you put a cap on these things, the way that you can be made whole.
Yeah,
and it's
and
wrong.
The jury wouldn't even know there's a cap. And I'm a Republican, conservative, Christian trial lawyer, so I'll take it farther. They won't even cut a check for $250,000 if that were the law. They'd say, hey, the most you're ever going to get out of a trial is $250,000. I don't have to pay you that much, because it's going to cost you $30,000 put on the trial, and it's going to be hard for you, and your client doesn't want to get on the stand and have to admit all of these harms. So, look, you're going to be lucky. I'm going to pay you $150, because the most you can get is $250, and your client gets to avoid the misery of rehashing all the pain and trauma they have. Look, $250 lid really means like $150, not more than $200. I get in practical outcomes. That's just fundamentally wrong. I'm opposed generally to telling a jury that they don't have the freedom of liberty to make somebody whole. Well, God bless you, and thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for coming on the show. And all right, folks, if you want to learn more about James Wesolek, he said you can go to RATLR.org, RATLR.org, and even request him as a speaker. So get out there and go forth. We appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Anthony. Appreciate the time.
Absolutely. And come back again. After you've done this a while and hear different stories and learn more and more, please come back and update us.
I would love to.
All right. All right, folks. So that was fascinating. James Wesolek of RATLR.org filling us in. And I had forgotten until he was speaking about the Hubris video. That was that incredible documentary that really exposed a lot of the power and abuse by the organization and the leaders at TLR. It had, as I recall, over 1 million views by conservatives in Texas. I remember at least a handful, if not many, of the Republican county parties were having watch parties with popcorn and pizza and observing it all. And I think a number of them may have denounced the effort, if not the organization TLR. But I'm thinking of not knowing, so you can learn all that on the website. But fascinating, and the fight for truth and good policy continues. And boy, that's why we have this. That's why we have this show, and that's why I'm organizing you all to speak with one voice, because we need to continue to move real policy reform. You know, I'm glad that we have school choice now. It's a little bit weird how they designed it, but we were like the 40th state in the union to give material choice to parents. That's fundamentally wrong, and I think in large part it's because of organizations like the one that he was talking about, TLR, who, if you're a rhino and you stand with the teachers unions or any of the unions or any of the liberals, but you vote for their 1 or 2 bills, then they're going to give you hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And you know, it's not lost on any of us. So we have not banned taxpayer-funded lobbying. That we had struggled to even pass voter ID, as crazy as that sounds, in Texas. It was one of my big fights for a long time. I helped champion that. That we have not been able to materially reform the size or scope of government. I mean, it's just insane that the budget has grown. I think it was close to 20% last 2 years cycle. and we have not had any material property tax relief. So many of us, I'm ready to move, 100%, downsize my home. This is just stifling. It's what am I going to end up paying per year for my kids' college? Fundamentally wrong, fundamentally flawed. We still have race-based programs. You know, they said, oh, we're going to end DEI. They didn't. They just rebranded it as hubs. In the Texas budget, you can see line items of different universities in Texas that need to strive for, but it's predicated on their funding, 19% of this minority class and 30% of this minority class. So, you know, as is often the case with politicians, they're just not being honest. They're kind of saying what they think we want to hear and then going to Austin doing something else. And these guys are in the middle of it all, hosting them. So fascinating information. If you want to watch Hubris, I forget the name of the organization that put that out, but it's on RATLR.org's website. If you want to learn more about Rattler and James Wesolek, go to their website, learn more, get him as a speaker and otherwise. So changing topics now, a lot of people have been asking me, including the media and a number of callers and folks contacted here, what all is on the line for Abbott, Governor Abbott, in this election cycle, because people are flagging and noticing that he's been so vocal in his endorsements and even making big contributions of his own campaign money to specific candidates. And I see three that distinguish from the others, right? So Abbott came out and opposed longtime Republican Ag Commissioner Sid Miller. Listeners, again, if you're joining us, this is Anthony Holm, host Politics with the Big Dogs. We just had James Wesolek, ED of a nonprofit called RATLR.org, Republicans Against TLR, on, and now we're transitioning to some of the questions that have been given to me by media and some of you who have emailed and contacted the show. And Governor Abbott's made a lot of endorsements, but three declarations in my mind stand above the rest. Number one, Sid Miller. Governor Abbott came out and endorsed against incumbent Sid Miller. I don't know Sid. If I've met him over the years, it's only in passing, so I just don't know much about him as an individual, but I can say that he gets a heck of a lot of conservative votes every single time. I know a number of people tried to take him out. And Abbott went out there and said, we got to replace him, just straight up. So let me list out the three. And then Abbott came out and said, I'm going to win Harris County. Republicans are going to win Harris County. And if I have to spend $100 million in November, we're going to do it. Harris County will go Republican. He made this proclamation. He declared it. And the third one, Kelly Hancock for comptroller. And regular listeners have known we've had all three of the major comptroller candidates on, Christy Craddock and Don Huffines and Kelly Hancock. Abbott appointed then Senator Hancock as acting comptroller, and my understanding has put in millions of his own campaign money into Hancock's effort. I think there's a really tight race among them. My gut is, I don't know, but my gut is that Kelly Hancock and Don Huffines will go into a runoff. So those are the three, Abbott, that are huge and unique from my perspective. Abbott came out and said, got to defeat Sid Miller, number one. Number two, Abbott said, we're going to win Harris County, period, in November. I'm going to win it. Number three, comptroller's got to be Hancock. All those ads are Abbott and Hancock side by side. So if he doesn't win at least two of the three, he being Abbott, I think he's materially impaired. And it's interesting to me. Many of you may disagree with this. It's just an opinion. Obviously, it's subjective. I have not found Abbott's political strength to be of endorsements and in politics to be impressive until last cycle. Right? He got real active, and a guy donated $7 million to try to help school choice, and Abbott got really involved in those races and funded and put his name on. And it was impressive. It was impressive. Took out a whole bunch of moderate incumbents. But prior to that, I had not seen Abbott perform politically to that level. And now I think he's taken a greater leap, frankly, with these three. Now he's done a whole bunch of endorsements along the way of other folks, but these are three huge ones that are just unique relative to the rest. If he can't get 2 of the 3 done, I think he's going to be severely impaired politically, just severely impaired. And man, I've never seen Sid Miller lose or even come close to losing. So I think that'll be really tough. Harris County, boy, it'd be great if it went Republican, but it's been an awful long time since it went Republican, and I think the wind is at our back. So that's a big one. And the most difficult of the 3 for me to gauge is the comptroller's race. I don't know who's going to win that. I suspect it's going to go to a runoff, but, I'm thinking and not knowing. But in my mind, if Abbott doesn't get at least 2 of the 3, he really needs to get all 3 since he put it on the line, then he's going to go forward materially impaired as a political kingmaker. Now, he's perhaps the best fundraiser that we've ever seen in the state. I think he is the best that I've ever seen, but that is different than his political strength.
Love what you're hearing? Find all of our shows at politicswiththebigdogs.com. Subscribe to our newsletter and send in your questions. politicswiththebigdogs.com.
More with Anthony Holm coming up in just a minute. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at politicswiththebigdogs.com. While you're there, make sure you listen to our previous episodes of Politics with the Big Dogs. Politics with the Big Dogs is brought to you by the First Amendment Alliance Education Fund. Got a question for Anthony Holm? Email Anthony at politicswiththebigdogs.com. Now, more with Anthony Holm on Politics with the Big Dogs.
Okay, and folks have also been asking me about some of these other races that are going on. I don't know all of them, but I'm reasonably informed on some of them. So we talked earlier in the show about Bexar County and TLR putting millions of dollars against Marc LaHood, conservative, constitutional conservative, new member there, and then also Marc Dorazio, 2 San Antonio-based guys. And Dorazio, of course, is the one had been on the SREC of the party, have been county chair of Bexar County when they censured Joe Strauss. I mean, this guy is just hard right conservative, and they're attacking him, right? So it does make you wonder, and makes more sense. They've given so many millions to liberal Democrats. So they're going after Dorazio and they're going after LaHood. I think both Marc Dorazio and Marc LaHood are going to win, and I'm going to call it here. They're going to win big. They're going to win big. I do think that these 2 guys. Oh, and we didn't talk about Hopper, Andy Hopper. They're also, there's another strong conservative up in North Texas that we all fought and funded last cycle, and now TLR is trying to take him out because, he was thoughtful about policy and is a constitutional conservative and said, hey, we can't do all this. It's not right. So now they're spending against. I think Andy's going to really knock the socks off of that race and probably win by double digits. So here are the 3 that are the tip of the spear in the Texas House. As I recall, last 15, 18 years or so, pretty much the Texas House and whoever was speaker at the time had to bend the knee to these guys, TLR, and largely do what they want. Paxton believes that they instigated and organized the impeachment. That's a pretty big example. A whole bunch of people lost over the impeachment. A lot of conservatives went after their members on that deal. So they had to bend the knee because they had this pack of $35, $45 million, whatever it is, and put all this cash into races. Well, they just proved Dorazio and LaHood and Hopper are the tip of the spear that is going to give power back to the Texas House. Dustin Burrows happens to be the speaker right now. I do not believe the Speaker of the Texas House, Dustin Burrows in this instance, will have to bend the knee to TLR. And when he is no longer Speaker and he patches this torch to the next person, that next Speaker of the Texas House will not have to bend the knee because Dorazio and LaHood, and Marc LaHood more than anybody, Marc LaHood, Marc Dorazio, and Andy Hopper were the tip of the spear of taking it for the team of 150 Texas House members that, hey, we can withstand their millions and still be elected, and I think elected big. This fear factor is going to be gone. Bad policy makes bad politics. So TLR went after a whole bunch of our conservatives' brethren, but they backed off at the end of the year and just stuck to these three. And I think they're going to lose them all. I think they're going to lose them all big. So their political juice is going to drop so much as a result. But most important, at least to me and I think to you, is the Texas House won't have to bend their knee to this lobby group that's trying to push liberal policy and things that are bad for Texas. And that's going to be the first time in recent memory, certainly in the last 12 years that I can think of. So these other races you guys keep asking me about, they're so hard for me to read. We've had at least Aaron Wright's in the AG race. I don't know who's going to win that AG race. I assume that Chip Roy and Mays Middleton will end up in a runoff, but that's just an assumption. I do think that, 2, maybe 3 Republican House members will go down in their own primary, but they aren't going to be Dorazio. They aren't going to be LaHood. They aren't going to be Hopper. Constitutional conservatives are going to stay strong. And then I don't think there will be any change in the Senate, and that's what's shocking to me, because Senator Schwartner, he just got lucky. He's by far the most vulnerable of any Republican. I think would have been pretty easy to take out. He and Jeff Leach are the two just toting the water for TLR and really bad policy. A really interesting candidate. There was a couple of them that filed against him, one of whom is like a Marine recon guy and a dad of a daughter and a strong lawyer. Schwartner got really lucky that no money came in against him, because he would have gone down. I just think he would have been beaten. So the Senate will probably stay as it is, and that's what I know. You guys have been asking. That is the best assessment that I have. The most important things are Abbott is really on the hook to make sure Nate Sheets win. He's really on the hook to make sure Harris goes Republican in November, and he's really on the hook to make sure Kelly Hancock wins comptroller. I think he has to win, at least get 2 of those 3, and he can't lose the third one by much to increase his political influence. And if he fails to do that, then it will probably decrease. And per the TLR and the House efforts, Dorazio, LaHood, and Andy Hopper, real constitutional conservatives, are going to overcome those millions of dollars. And there just won't, and I think win big, and there just won't be a fear factor among this 8,000-pound gorilla anymore. And that'll be fascinating for all of us. We'll just have to see what happens, and power restored to the people and what they do with it. So thank you so much. Again, Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. Be sure you follow us on social media. Go to politicswiththebigdogs.com. Sign up for our newsletter. Get involved. Sign some of our petitions. Go find Hubris. Go find RATLR.org. We're going to try to expose you to as many fascinating, interesting people and organizations as we can. Thank you so much. And look, we'll know here in 3 days most of this prognostication. Harris County will have to wait till November, but we're going to know real soon. So thank you so much. God bless you, and God bless Texas.
If you read the newspaper or watch your local news, did you know you're only getting press release news from Austin? We're here to bring you the real stories. Politics with the Big Dogs, hosted by conservative host Anthony Holm, is the place for everything the mainstream media isn't covering. Hear the show anytime at politicswiththebigdogs.com.
Politics with the Big Dogs with Anthony Holm is supported in part by the First Amendment Alliance Education Fund. Learn more about today's guest and hear other episodes online in our archive. Visit politicswiththebigdogs.com. If you have a question for Anthony Holm, email Anthony at politicswiththebigdogs.com. From deep in the heart of Texas, you've been listening to Politics with the Big Dogs.